Hello, welcome to LubeTrends. Chuck?
Yeah, hello everyone, and welcome to ILMA LubeTrends Town Hall. I'm Chuck Decker, President of American Oil and Supply International LLC, and current ILMA Board President. First, I want to thank Chevron Oronite for being our LubeTrends webinar sponsors. It is great to connect with our ILMA friends once again as we're fighting COVID. Today, we have over 180 ILMA attendees. Another great session. Our leader, ILMA CEO Holly Alfano.
Hi, thanks everybody. So this afternoon, we're going to have a Q&A style format. And please, if you want to submit questions, feel free to do so from the Q&A section located at the top right of your screen. Chuck, could you give a quick update on who's going to be joining us today, who's going to be participating?
Sure thing, Holly, and thank you. Holly, we are really lucky to have two experts from C.H. Robinson. Steve Raetz, yes, that is true, Raetz. We all know what rates are. Kidding aside, Steve is the Director of Research and Market Intelligence for C.H. Robinson. Thank you, Steve. Next, we have Adam Kroupa, Director of Chem Solutions for C.H. Robinson. Last but not least, from our northern border, and my good friend, Jarrett Flegel. Jarrett is the president and COO of Boss Lubricants. Jarrett was the first and only Canadian ILMA president and currently serves as treasurer for the ILMA Foundation. Jarrett, Adam, and Steve, thank you for joining us today. Enjoy the program.
Okay, Steve is going to kick it off with a few slides. So Steve, you want to get started here? You got to unmute, Steve.
There we go. All right, I'm going to try to share my screen. If you can let me know, Holly, if the PowerPoint is showing up. I think not, right? Or is it there?
Yes. Yeah.
You see the cover slide? Perfect. All right. So thank you everybody for the opportunity to give you some insights to the trucking marketplace. And today, Adam and I are going to just spend 10 minutes maybe. We only have 3 slides to quickly introduce you to kind of today's marketplace. I'll talk more broadly. Adam's going to bring color with his expertise in the bulk space so that you get a sense of how that correlates or has some unique attributes to the broader truckload marketplace. The content that I'll be referencing is largely US, but we do have ability as we go through today in the Q&A to talk about cross-border US, Canada, and Mexico, US as well. So feel free to think of questions that way. So to start out, this is a unique year. As was introduced, COVID has been part of it. What I'm offering here is a lens to the spot market. The spot market for truckload is generally considered to be somewhere about 15 to 25% of the overall trucking market. Most freight is traded in committed relationships between suppliers and shippers. The smaller percentage is the spot market, but it is the place where we get a lens to the market because of these dynamic trading platforms versus committed freight is held in individual companies' transportation management systems and their relationships, all these private relationships. So this gives us at least a lens, and the spot market is oftentimes considered a leading indicator to the broader truckload market. What's here is from DAT, which is a trading board for spot market loads. And I am showing van. So when Adam adds his color in, it'll be unique to what we're showing here. So this is van freight, and it's relative to January. So the numbers that I'm showing are not year over year or sequential. So we peg January at 0, and we show the relative movement of loads being posted to the spot market in blue and trucks being posted in gray. And the quick narrative is in March is when we were all planning on getting ready to be home, right? The shutdown related to COVID. And so we went on a little bit of a buying spree to fill up our pantries and refrigerators and so forth. And we had a 32% increase in spot market loads compared to January. Now, March always has an up, but that's about double what normally is done. And so there was already tension being felt in route guides as freight had to migrate off of route guides to the spot market with that surge. What happened then in April, when you take a look at April here, is that the situation of shutting down the economy and essential businesses only quickly loads dropped off in the spot market from 32% above January to 50% below. That kind of switch is not something we normally see. Truck postings went up a little bit, as you can see, as carriers who are still active were looking for loads because they weren't coming out of the route guides from their committed relationships. In this period of April, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US, we lost 88,000 trucking jobs just in April. Between March and April, 94,600. Okay. Now that's companies that have payroll. It doesn't even count the owner operator community, which is about 24% of the trucking companies, or 24%, I'm sorry, of the power units, about 95% of the companies. So it's an amazing dynamic that we only get a lens to part of the marketplace. As the economy opened, you can see demand flooded into the spot market. And the reason is the jobs we lost did not come back into trucking the way we expected. You can see the postings of trucks stayed below January right on through November. The trucking jobs, about 82% of them have come back, and they came back to short haul and specialized trucking markets, not the general long haul. And nor did we get our normal seasonal growth of supply during these months when demand was growing. So we really felt this tension. This is really a story of supply shortage, not that demand surged. We're only now in November for the first month crossed over total tonnage from 2019. So it's all about a shortage of supply. Adam, any comments on the tanker side?
Yeah, I would actually second most of what you're seeing here as far as truck postings and volume commitments or volume requirements. It was, mid-June, July, as we started to see the freight start to outpace the supply. And again, we talk about drivers and driver shortages. We had stimulus packages in place, and then health concerns were all involved. On the bulk side, we're actually seeing a little bit more of an impact and drivers staying home because there is more interaction with those bulk drivers typically at a shipper or receiver than you're seeing on the truckload side. Certainly those drivers in a lot of instances are working to help load or offload. So I don't have specific data numbers that we're displaying here today, but it is at least what you're seeing on the truckload side, if not more of a disparity.
Okay, thank you, Adam. So I would offer the audience, there's a lot more we can talk about in terms of labor and the impact of the stimulus package and so forth, all that. We can take that during the Q&A. So if you have questions about where is trucking labor, what's really happened, how did this occur, feel free to post your questions and we can continue to take those. We're just kind of setting a platform for you for the Q&A coming forth. The next one is to give you a regional view. And this is current, and this is through week 47, as you can see. Week 50 is very similar, which was last week. We didn't get an updated slide to Holly this morning as we just went through the update. But what you're seeing is here load to truck ratios in the spot market again for DAT. So think of how many loads are being posted to truck. General rule of thumb, when you're up here at the legend in this yellow area, 5-to-1 would be considered an exceptionally tight market. Okay. Now, some markets are always tight, like Montana and the Pacific Northwest, where there's not much of a freight economy and it's just persistently tight. What we've been talking about of this late last month or couple months, the Midwest here, part of the country, hanging around this 5 mark persistently, and there's a lot of freight volume there. That's been a big part of the trucking economy and conversation about route guides struggling and access to spot market freight and so forth. The other 2 markets that exceptionally have been talked about is the LA port region, LA Long Beach, with this huge influx still of vessels coming in from Asia to replenish inventory levels that are persistently low across most industries, especially retail, and the demand coming off that area for both intermodal and truck. And then finally, the Laredo, Texas area down here, what you see here is the beginning of finally some lessening attention. As the 2 economies opened between Mexico and US, there was no coordination. And we've been seeing persistently far more freight coming north than going south. And so consequently, there's never capacity down at the border to bring freight in, and carriers are looking for round trip costs to be covered. So pricing feels very elevated. And finally, we've settled into the 5-to-1 ratio versus 15 and 20-to-1 that it had been more in the summer. Adam, any color commentary about regional sensitivity on the tanker side?
I think, Steve, you hit the nail on the head with everything. Most everyone on the call that knows tanker knows that there are specific areas that have the infrastructure that are more difficult to get capacity out of right now. You can look through the Midwest. That area has been pretty tight. West Coast, Texas has not had too much of a weather pattern issue this year. A couple little spots through the Gulf in Louisiana and Northeast Texas, but nothing like we've seen in the years past. So that hasn't been too significant, but yes, as Steve was saying, where you see those red spots continue to be difficult. And I would even add some more in the Cincinnati, Chicago, those sorts of areas in the Midwest.
All right, thank you. So this is our final slide to kind of wrap up and help set up for our Q&A session as well. Headwinds and tailwinds that we're talking about is all around supply and demand. And so truck sales, what we're looking at broadly in the United States, at least this year, is 2020 is going to end up with a slight contraction, maybe 5,000 Class 8 tractor contraction, not material. 2021 is forecasted now for about a 35,000 tractor increase if current orders come forth as they are. And the benefit of that is that, of course, we'll have some expanded capacity to meet the tension that's out there. Understanding there's a 5-month lag now from the time trucks are ordered today till they're delivered. So, we might think that the Q1 still could have some tension before we get delivery of these new vehicles, into 2021. Think about that. Fleets are getting much higher utilization right now as demand patterns are stabilizing and carriers can plan their multi-leg routes and get higher yield. And the new hours of service in the United States gives real flexibility to drivers when it comes to their 30-minute break period and their 10-hour sleeper berth. If you're not familiar with those, we can talk about that in the Q&A as well. But these things effectively help carriers be more effective, which means they can do more loads per month, even without new trucks. So it's very interesting. So as we've touched on a number of the things in the insight summary here, what I would offer when we talked about the Midwest being difficult, also the distance band of 400 to 600 miles is exceptionally difficult right now in today's market. Carriers we're seeing in route guides are choosing longer haul and shorter haul versus the middle. And that has to do with hours of service, scheduling appointments, and downtime in those one-day transit points. So be mindful of that. We could talk about dwell events if you're interested. We've done research in that space, and it's directly correlated to tender acceptance and price paid. And in the end, have a strategy. Build in lead time when you have really variable demand patterns that can't be predicted by your carrier and broker community. And maybe you need to put a little inventory buffer in there for variableness in service right now. Some shippers are doing that. And if you've got a truckload strategy, be prepared to maybe manage it, maintain it, amend it in today's marketplace. It's a tight one. I'm going to stop there because you can read the slides. Adam, any comments about tanker then as well?
The only thing I'll add here is typically December seems to be a slower time of the year. We have not seen any slowness across the country as we are closing down 2020. There's a myriad of reasons that could be happening. But one thing I will say is we've seen a lot more suppliers planning production around capacity. So it's not so much, hey, we need you to pick this up on Tuesday. There's a much greater back and forth on when do you have available capacity and when can you get this picked up. So just as you're planning your production, think of reaching out to your suppliers, your truckload, your bulk suppliers prior to actually scheduling those production plans. Otherwise you might be in a more difficult spot, at least through the next, through the rest of the year and projections right now, or even to mid-January on some of these. So just something to keep mind of there.
Perfect. So with that, I think we're done with our opening comments. And Holly, I'll stop sharing and turn it back to you for the next segment of today's event.
Thank you. Jarrett's going to be coming back on as well here in a moment. There he is. This is a very interesting perspective. But one thing we haven't really heard so much, and I'm going to ask Jarrett to comment on, is to give the fleet owner perspective. Jarrett, I know this has been probably a challenging time for you and for all ILMA members. What were some of your transportation challenges over the last year? And is there anything that you've learned from those experiences that you will carry over into the future?
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to quickly say hello to all the fellow ILMA members out there, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy during the holiday season. Yeah, you're right, Holly. It's been quite a challenging year this past year with the pandemic, and the guys from CH Robinson. It's good to be on the panel with you guys. I think you guys, it really mirrors what the slides that you presented today. Some of the details that we're impacted by were hit home there when you put those slides up. We have up in Canada a large demographic of older drivers in Canada that are in the 65 plus category. And so we're having a tough time finding new drivers, younger drivers. Luckily, we're starting to see more women come into the driving workforce, which is always a good thing. But we have a lack of drivers up in Canada. You saw some of those northwestern Pacific states you had in red, and the high ratios of 15-1. That we're just north of that. I can imagine the ratio is closer to 20 to 25-1 in some cases, being that we're such a sparse density area up in Canada. So it makes it extra difficult. Another thing that makes it tough is there's a barrier to entry now because drivers are retiring earlier. And what we're seeing is things like Skip the Dishes, Uber, DoorDash. Drivers are saying, hey, I don't have to be away from my family. Especially the young drivers are saying, hey, I want to pick my own hours. I want to be my own boss. And those are some of the challenges our industry faces. So yeah, those are some of just to touch base with a few.
Adam and Steve, do you have anything to add to that? Anything that we can learn that we could carry over into next year?
The points were perfect, Jarrett, and your experiences overlay nicely with really the broader marketplace. That retirement bubble that you're talking about, that really is part of the issue with the labor today and the return of capacity after the economic shutdown. Carriers are citing that while we've always had this demographic of retirement bubble coming at us, it's been accelerated because of the average age of drivers and generally have pre-existing health conditions. So they're fearful of COVID, to your point. And the alternative jobs like driving a car or e-commerce, all the fulfillment type to our homes and everything, the jobs that have been coming back in the US, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, a lot of it in the short local market driving, right? Much to reinforce what you're talking about there, rather than general long haul trucking. So I think that's exactly right on. And the other point on women, I really took note that you said you're seeing more women drivers. Broadly in the United States, I think they're like 6% of the driver workforce, where the overall workforce, it's like 50%, right? If we had women drivers trucking, we wouldn't have a driver situation. So congratulations that you're doing well there. The industry itself really needs to that's its solution, frankly, and its biggest gap.
You've been talking about the driver shortage. Are there any strategies that you've used to attract and retain drivers, Jarrett, at Boss Lubricants? Have you stumbled on anything that you want to share with us here today?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had to put some retention type incentive bonuses in, as well as other types of incentives for safe driving, good paperwork. We're already, in our company anyway, have already introduced the electronic log situation. So if for accuracy reporting, timely reporting, we have a kind of a full analytics criteria checklist, if you would, that we give to our drivers to follow. And if they follow those, they're incentivized or rewarded accordingly for those.
That's great. Steve and Adam, have you heard of any unique strategies that some of the trucking companies might be using to attract or retain drivers?
I'll jump in here quick. One of the things, safety, obviously on the bulk side, and for anybody on this call, safety should be a very high priority. So We're seeing companies give out bonuses for finding safe practices, or not to overly have a stop work authority, but hey, calling out and acknowledging you did a really good job to find an issue or a gap in this process. We're seeing a lot more of that. Again, always looking at benefits or bonuses to drivers who are doing a lot of the manual work. I mentioned it before, getting out of the trucks, loading and offloading. We're not seeing any wholesale like accessorials if a driver has to do the work, but we are certainly seeing a heck of a lot more questions up front as to what will the driver work be. We can talk about shipper of choice and that sort of thing a little bit as we go through this today. But if the drivers are doing work, you're starting, I truly believe you're starting to see some of those costs come into a line haul fashion where it may not be an accessorial yet, but you are starting to see compensation for those drivers through different avenues.
Along these lines, we've gotten a couple of questions in our Q&A. And by the way, reminder to attendees to submit your questions. And they're both talking about autonomous trucking, driverless trucks. Samantha Allen asks, how do the panelists foresee autonomous trucking to impact future freight market? Is that on the panelists' investment horizon in the next 10 years? 10 years, that's pretty short, but I think these are coming along. I'll let y'all comment on that. And the other question is how long do you anticipate driverless trucks to begin appearing on the highways? Someone want to jump in here?
Oh, I'll take a stab at starting it. It's an interesting topic, especially since I just before this call read an article that said that Walmart was moving to a driverless lane from a DC to a dark store in Arkansas. So a local delivery, a single lane. They've passed all the testing for that municipality for a delivery vehicle. Autonomous trucks are already being used at the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach. So controlled environments like that, right? We have autonomous forklifts and warehouses. So my first answer is controlled environments. Autonomy is already here and being deployed, right? That's for sure. This Walmart moving to a fully autonomous vehicle after testing, that's a new threshold. In general, it depends. To answer the question 10 years out and so forth, a lot of this has to do with not just the technology advancement, which is advancing rapidly, right? There's still great limitations, but how fast technology advances. It's regulatory and legislative activity that will need to be done, right? Because the states are pursuing this aggressively, but not the federal government, right? It's just like marijuana legalization. Legal at the states, but not federally, and it's posing a real issue for trucking. Autonomy is going to have similar issues. So I think it's going to be a phased out situation from controlled environments to maybe truck only lanes, long distance, and drivers doing the local, things of that nature. Most people that I've seen talk on this topic that are in the technology space to have everything autonomous, like cars, trucks, all environments, all weather conditions, period. That could be still 20 years out or more. But again, they're here today in controlled environments. So who knows? I mean, we'll see.
Jarrett, are we going to see autonomous trucks in Canada anytime soon? It's a tough environment there.
In certain segments, we already are starting to see oil and gas companies and open pit mines. Big gravel trucks are already remote controlled. So we kind of use that as a form as autonomous. But as far as on highway, the bandwidth is a major issue in Canada, as generally speaking. So I can't imagine having more people using the bandwidth that's limited already. Mm-hmm. With our weather will affect bandwidth. So if you have a storm, your trucks are and you're relying on autonomous trucks to carry your freight. I would say in the early stages, you might not want to be first out of the gate in the industry and put all your eggs in one basket. But I would imagine, like everything in the world today, it's slowly, like Steve was alluding to earlier, you'll see a slow introduction into it where it makes sense, like in Arkansas where there's designated lanes. But up here, we're going to still have a driver in a truck, even if it's an autonomous vehicle. I would imagine at least for the next 5 to 10 years minimum. And then the insurance thing becomes a whole question too. If there's an accident, and how are all insurance companies, you know, put these claims through and fault and stuff. So there's so many, to me, high risk issues that still regulatory have to be worked out before we see these things going down the road as a majority of fleet anytime soon.
Yeah, good point. You know, here in the United States, Congress really needs to pass an infrastructure bill, and hopefully in the next Congress they'll address that. But there's going to have to be some major upgrades to our road infrastructure to accommodate these trucks. So anyway, that's just an aside. You know,
And Holly, sorry.
Yeah,
I was
go
going to
ahead.
add one thing real quick here too, and I would say, if you look at autonomous vehicles, I don't know that we're necessarily going to have completely self-driving vehicles in the next 10 years. I think we'll have a lot more driver assist in those capacities. So you look at, I know Steve had mentioned before how many new trucks are coming out. It's almost becoming, in a way, an arms race for trucking companies to get the latest technology to make it safer and easier for drivers. You think of bulk, there's a slosh factor in any bulk. You know, 10 years ago, the thought of an automatic truck in a bulk environment was insane. No driver would think that you could use an automatic transmission. Now they're getting more and more used to it, and you're getting trucks that in traffic can drive themselves, much like passenger vehicles can do. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that before we see all these regulations and everything. You've got a driver in place who doesn't have to focus quite as much on every single thing around them. They're more controlling the machine as opposed to starting and stopping and shifting and all those different things are involved.
Okay. Well, interesting. I'm sure we'll be hearing about this for the next few years. And just like any kind of technology, it always starts off slow and then it moves really quickly. So it'll be interesting to watch. Just, you know, we've talked about the driver shortage and some of these challenges. And I would imagine that that's one of the factors that affects rates, but without getting too specific, because we do have antitrust issues here. We don't want to be predicting anything. But what are some of the factors that could affect freight rates in the next few months? Is it Steve or Adam want to?
I can take that one off the bat here.
Oh, good.
Yeah, up in Canada here, we've our government, unfortunately, being the leader in some of their initiatives, is introducing a carbon tax. So we're going to see price of fuel go up. As well, we've seen a huge increase in insurance premiums on vehicles. So I'll just put those two out to start the conversation. But that's what we're seeing in Canada. So it's going to affect rates quite substantially. And then compact that with the shortage of drivers. And boy, you need to pat your drivers on the back if you have drivers in your companies, because they're on the road a lot, long highway driving, and they think a lot, and doesn't cost any money to give a pat on the back. So now more than ever, I would just say this coming year, give your drivers a pat on the back.
Steve and Adam, rates, what some of the factors that could affect it in the next few months?
I think Steve's having a little bit of technical difficulty, so he's getting back on here. But you said what could impact rates over the next few months?
Yeah, some of the factors. Yeah.
You know, we've talked about driver shortages. I still think there is a large question mark as to what our new administration is going to do. So those are some questions that we're going to need to figure out as we push through the end of the year, in through January, and then any changes that might happen in our government. We don't typically, I mean, Holly, I know you're dealing with some weather right now. We don't typically see any large weather events that are so changing, like a hurricane that might knock out capacity for a while. A blizzard might come through over the next few months that would slow down roads and transportation, but it's not like we're going to see, we don't have any reason to believe there will be a large shift in that. One short-term issue that I think we're looking at is what will COVID do? Again, that's a big question here, but what's COVID going to do to availability of drivers and to availability of production? We're already seeing companies that are shutting down between Christmas and New Year's, which isn't typically the way that they would operate in that regard. We're having a lot of issues right now where drivers might be available in the morning, and then they find out that one of their family members is sick, so they have to go through COVID shutdown protocols, and they're done for 14 days. So there's a lot of little things in the short term that I think could impact rates. Across the board, as we look into 2021 and we do our RFPs and pricing mechanisms for next year, we're seeing slight increases in price. We're not seeing anything that is drastic, but we're certainly not seeing any reductions at this point. I think there's, if you're putting together a pricing program, truckload or bulk, I think it might make sense at this point to have a revisit point sometime in the middle of the year. If you are pricing now, you may have a significant price change mid-year due to different factors that are coming up that I'm briefly mentioned there.
Okay, well, thanks. Another thing there's been a lot of talk about in the marketplace is digital freight matching or digitization. Can you explain what that is and what it does? What does it mean to a company as a customer or shipper?
Yeah, I can take that. I know Steve's trying to get back on here.
Yeah.
Digital freight matching is a lot of trying to get your trucks to match where the freight is. Think of, your apps. You can order food, you can have it delivered. Trying to focus a little bit more on that in the truckload space to say, hey, here's our freight, here's our trucks, and matching those together. So you get a company like C.H. Robinson that does that. There's other companies out there that you're familiar with, I'm sure, that have platforms that do that as well. When we talk about that digital freight matching piece, it used to be that you would, if you were a supplier that was EDI'd with a trucking company, there would be a large barrier to entry to get new carriers in place, to get their rates loaded. Companies, and again, I'll throw C.H. Robinson out there, there's a lot of other companies that are doing this too, that have really cut down some of those barriers to entry, where if you have a trucking company that you want to bring into the mix, you can add them pretty easily and not have a huge issue to get them into your routing guide, to get their rates loaded. It's becoming a much more fluid process. So when you see a digital freight matching, it's not only necessarily looking at matching your freight to a truck, but it's also carriers who are trying to build out virtual networks that are then posting and realizing where their capacity is to align with the freight mix. So it's both sides using, whether it be a web-based platform or something like the DAT or whatever, to really understand markets and move their capacity to those areas that best benefits themselves and then in turn the customers. And I'll pass it over to Jarrett if he has anything he wants to add there.
Jarrett?
No, I think we don't touch too much on it up here. I know if you have scheduled production runs, digital, it makes a lot of sense to do that kind of format or matchup, but we don't utilize it too much. We're more of a just in time, so I can't speak too much to it at this time.
Okay, Steve, have you been able to rejoin us? Just checking here. Okay. Can we hear it? Can we hear you?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah. Somehow I got completely dropped off and I can't hang up and reset. And
okay.
After I give you some comments here, if you can kick me off, I'll try to join back in and get this working. I don't know what happened.
I'll see what I can do.
I seem to be in duplicate right now. So
yeah, that's okay.
Digital freight matching, that's the question we're on?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, digital freight matching is really is leveraging today's technological capabilities. You know, we can capture data like we never could before. Data storage is virtually free. And now with the advanced business analytics and the high-speed computing and machine learning and moving towards artificial intelligence, what it comes down to is pricing is highly automated. So like we're in all kinds of arrangements with clients where robots talk to robots. Shipments are tendered, our robot prices it, negotiation goes back and forth digitally, loads get accepted, right? Then you move it to operations, you take a look at your carrier profile, you watch for matches, you make those matches. So that's this whole digital platform that's out there. It works pretty good for that spot market activity, that unplanned freight. I think what we're learning through this is that, and let's go back to my earlier comment, the spot market's only 15 to 25% of all truckload anyways. Most shippers have a decent portfolio of freight that's highly plannable. And so those relationships that plan price and capacity and so forth, those, I don't think you move into this digital pricing world, because in the case of most of the situations, there my video came back, the lane is offering so much value for the carrier. When they put one lane with another lane, they get higher yield out of a multi-leg route in a week. That's very different than the transactional spot market, and pricing moves with less volatility and oftentimes will just simply outperform the spot market materially. So digital freight matching, I think, is a spot market enhancement, and it allows spot market to be more of a strategy these days for that unplanned freight rather than just the backup plan.
Okay. Actually, as long as we're talking about the spot market, we actually got a good question here. Can you speak to the pros and cons of relying on spot trucking versus a contract? Does anyone want to comment on that?
You want me to start since I was kind of on there?
Sure.
So I think spot market is probably the only way you can go for freight that is unplannable. We've done a lot of research at this. Part of my job is commissioning research, and we take shipment history and route, data from dozens and dozens of shippers, and we take it to universities that do statistical analysis to correlate strategies and outcomes and attributes of freight. Spot market demand variability is the leading attribute to why tenders to carriers and brokers are rejected. If a carrier or broker can't anticipate the demand, they can't plan for it. And carriers and brokers like ourselves increasingly are pre-planning routes. And so they anticipate freight so they can build these routes and get high yield. Spot market lends itself to support the freight that's not plannable. I think I'll stop there and see, does that kind of get to the nut of the question?
I think so. Anyone else want to comment, Jarrett?
Yeah, I think, Steve, you said it right. When the market is hot and there's not a lot, and there's a high demand and not many driver carriers out there available, you're gonna be paying higher freight bills on the spot market. But if you when the demand is low, then the spot market makes sense. It really does. But so you just have to decide where, as your strategic balance, where does spot buying versus contracted carrier loads make sense. So we do both, because we don't haul everything ourselves, and so we have both contracted that we know freight that's moving to certain mass merchandisers every week, kind of every month, and then when there's anomaly orders for big orders from distributors or whatnot, then we got to use carriers that we can't accommodate ourselves, and sometimes we're ahead. But in this day and age, I would more weigh on the fact that if you can contract a carrier and know what that price is going to be, with the exception of the fuel surcharge, we're leveraging more towards that, the known versus the unknown. So that's just our opinion up here for what our experience has shown us over the past year.
Okay. We got another good question from Richard Camper, and he's asking about the last mile deliveries. He's talking about how products can get to a regional warehouse, but that they can't get someone to deliver it locally. We have the capability to come get the products, but we get a lot of pushback from the shipper to come get our stuff. Do you think there's a possibility that shippers will loosen restrictions regarding picking up product at regional warehouses? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
I mean, my experience up here is that there's more restrictions when you go to pick up a load at these docks than there ever have been before. And what our drivers are allowed to do, we used to be allowed to, walk into the facility, work in conjunction with the shipper receiver. And sometimes now they're saying you can't even come on site if you've got a beard. You have to park your truck and you go over there to the safe area and hang out, and we'll tell you when your truck's loaded. So I can't speak to the whole market, but if anything, I'm seeing more restrictions for unloading and loading and shipping restrictions. So yeah.
Yeah, the COVID environment especially has enhanced that, right? For safety. Capacity for local has been more readily available. But yeah, I think it's the restriction and safety is become increasingly concerned, which I think is where Jarrett was going, especially if you're at a facility like that where you have to have hard hat or steel-toed shoes, things of that nature.
Could it be that capacity for local is taken up by a lot of the Uber, Lyft, Amazon type deliveries, and that the independent business person is having a harder time, or making arrangements for, competing with them? Is that possible?
I'm trying to decide if I caught your.
Oh, did you hear what I said?
You're wondering?
I was commenting on the last mile delivery, and if Amazon and Uber, Lyft, and all those types of opportunities are taking drivers, then it seems it could be that the independent person that is trying to hire someone to go pick up their products and deliver them could be having a harder time attracting help with that. Anyway, okay, well, another question, would you say that developing strong relationships with carriers will keep rates relatively consistent over the long term?
I think, I absolutely 100% now more than ever, as I alluded to before. This industry is can't be taken for granted as it has been in the past. So I can't emphasize enough how relationships and the culture of your business works will shape who you attract. Carriers want to do business with you or not. And I know some carriers that we've experienced come here, and the drivers are so inexperienced that we've had spills, we've had accidents, we've had and how those relationships, when those situations occur, is dependent on whether or not the future relationship's going to sustain itself or not. So I would just say that that relationship is more powerful and necessary more than ever.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's an interesting question, and I think as a service provider, we firmly believe relationships matter. To your point, Jarrett, the key thing that I think we've seen in our research too is, while relationships do matter, and there is stability in some of the best performing route guides, and I think that goes to Jarrett's point. The second attribute that's it's interesting, more influential to like tender acceptance is that predictable cadence of the tender. In other words, if I was awarded business, was it tendered to me? If that doesn't continue, then you start to see variance in behavior. So it's really interesting when we've tried to study that stability of relationship and how valuable it is to the service provider community that not only is the relationship there, but then the tenders follow. In other words, the relationship only carries you so far, right?
Right.
It's an interesting dynamic.
Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit since we're just talking about trucking, and we are going to talk about transportation management systems, or TMS, and how does that benefit a small to medium-sized trucker? shipper. Can Jarrett, you wanna answer that one? Take a stab at it.
Yeah, absolutely. So the internal system we have, the analytics you get alone have more than paid for this system, the software system that we put in 7 or 8 years ago. I mean, from analytics such as driver behavior, fuel efficiency or lack of fuel efficiency, maintenance costs. I mean, these software systems give you so much information, the geo tracking of driver behavior, that you realize you might have a fleet of 10 trucks that are the same make and model, and two of the 10 are giving you really bad fuel mileage compared to the other 8 going the same kind of route. So you start to get these patterns, and it allows you to take proactive initiative on finding out what's going on, if there is something going on that's an anomaly or not, as versus reacting and just kind of getting the expense reports rolling in every month and thinking, well, my fleet's just getting older and that's just the cost of business. Well, this software is a real game changer to allow a business owner to really assess their maintenance fleet and their carrier fleet to how they're doing.
Yeah.
Adam or Steve?
Yeah, TMS, frankly, it's central to managing transportation these days. And the nice thing is there's a portfolio of products out there to support the small business to the global supply chain. And they manage all modes of transportation, self-serve to fully outsourced, depending on what you want to do, to Jarrett's point. And what I would offer is, because the self-serve ones are kind of pay as you go, they're transactional based, so forth. They really do right size to the small shipper, to the question that was here. And I would recommend even a small shipper find that small TMS capability that's out there. I know we've, as Robinson, gone to market with one as well. And the idea is you can keep your relationships in there. You can manage your tender acceptance. You can hold your suppliers accountable. You can handle the payment processes, right? It's really difficult to manage your plan and measure against it if you're not in a system. And there are systems to deal with small business. You don't think you have to buy the big massive ERP that's the wrong thing. You will find something that meets your business need.
Okay. What are some benefits to managing an inbound supply chain? Adam?
I'll jump on that one quickly there. I think if you're managing the freight that's coming into your facility, big things there is you can understand when that truck's going to arrive. You can understand how that's going to impact your production, and you can start looking at inventory levels in space, whether it be warehouse space or whatever. We have actually done a lot with customers to start to manage. They used to have everything delivered, and due to the Amazons of the world that give such good updates, they didn't feel in some instances like they had enough visibility into their supply chain and any delays that might be coming about. They felt that there was a lot of requirements or reasons for them to stop and say, call their carriers, figure out where their trucks are, figure out where the delays are and why they may not be hitting the KPIs that they've set themselves. So when you manage that inbound side and the customer or vendor or whoever you are is directly managing that relationship with the trucking companies and then those suppliers, you as an inbound supplier can use trucking as a way to fill in maybe some gaps that your suppliers have created, expediting or modal conversions. If you're going to ship it LTL and it might be a 5-day transit and you need that product in 2 days for a run, you can move it over to truckload, paying a little bit more, but it may come out in the long run that you're in a better spot because you're hitting your demand or your production schedules. So we really see customers that like to own that inbound supply chain because they are then able to control a lot more of the controllables on their side, which gives them the ability to shift ahead of schedule before they're expecting something to be there.
all those points are accurate. In addition to control and visibility and the business processes you're talking about, Adam, we also typically see that there's money to be saved. When you unbundle freight from your cost of goods, and oftentimes freight gets bundled into cost of goods, there's usually money to be saved as well. It's a lot of work. And move transportation of inbound management from procurement into the transportation function at your business. So if there's ever interest on it, Holly, for your members, we commissioned Paul Dittman at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville a few years ago to do some research about inbound transportation opportunities. And so it's a white paper he wrote that we could make available if people are interested in what the benefits are.
Okay, great. Sounds interesting. What about cross-border movement of goods? And what are the challenges or capacity issues you might be seeing regarding moving goods over Canada, Mexico, US, so on?
Yeah, so what we've experienced is just sometimes it's more of a delay now than it has been in the past. Haven't seen any real other major restrictions. Just more delays is what we've experienced as a medium-sized business. So I can't really speak to anything outside of that.
Yeah, I think the Canada-US border is pretty fluid and operating pretty good. To your point, Jarrett, I think I would agree. Mexico-US is much more of a challenge always, and right now especially so with the imbalance of trade north and southbound. We're seeing there, during the COVID time, there was an exceptional amount of warehousing that was opened up to put freight in to wait for available capacity to go north, as example. And then there's new labeling requirements that recently went into play that they're holding up a lot of cross-border activity as well. So between capacity and labeling issues right now, you definitely need to plan more lead time and frankly, cost coming across the border north.
Okay. One of our members asks, how do you suggest coordinating the daily logistics at the plant level? No matter how we try, some driver always shows up at the wrong time and it destroys the schedule.
Yeah, this still happens even with our internal management systems and policies and procedures in place and our ISO and everything. You still have, it comes down to relationships. Let's be honest. Some carriers tell you when they're coming. Some give you access to that management software that you could see. Oh, he's going to be here within the hour. Get the hoses ready, guys. Get it ready. That bulk trailer's coming in or that rail car's coming in. But in some cases, some still just show up and they apologize, or it's just the whole part of the relationship thing. I don't know if there's ever a way to improve it other than to remind your supplier carriers to please, we really rely on service and communication, and please let us know. That's kind of our experience anyway.
Anyone else care to comment?
Yeah, I think Jarrett kind of hit it. I mean, you're dealing with a whole bunch of different factors that go into on-time arrival. When you're looking at something like retail right now, there's some KPIs that are in place, on time and full. We do a lot to try to build out programs and track and do predictive analytics on trucks and those things. And even with all of that, you still have that human element of a driver that his hours are different than his dispatch thought and he needed to stop, or traffic doesn't align with the way that you think, and what may be a 20-minute delay turns into a 3-hour delay. On the tank side, we're seeing, and this should be known, you should hear about this ahead of time, but tank washes have been delayed. That's some more of the COVID issue, but something that might typically take 2 hours to get a tank washed is and that's kind of what you plan. Well, now maybe it's 5 or 6 hours until you get that tank. So you can set processes in place, and obviously I'm speaking on the transportation side, so I may have had to but extend a few excuses in the past, but we don't make up excuses, they're always true. But the discussion is always, this is what happened, this is where we think it happened, and this is why, and this is how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen next time. But there's so many factors that get involved. And while, everyone on this call realizes the importance of being on time, having the shipment in full, I think as we look at capacity tightening, as we've all seen over the last few months, those shippers that can be flexible are going to be the ones that are going to have those trucks come January, February, March into next year. Because if you are a very stringent customer, shipper, receiver, whatever, while we all realize we want to hit those times, if you are always very strict to 5 minutes, an hour, that sort of thing, or 5 minutes, 10 minutes, and not giving a buffer, you will start to see issues finding capacity, and you will start to see issues with your prices going up when you do. It maybe shouldn't be that way, but it is. And that's why we're on this call today, is to really just discuss things that we're seeing from maybe a perspective that you're not used to.
And I might add just 2 little points to this. Number one, we've done research in this space, and when we took a look, I think it was like 40 shippers, and we looked at all on-time performance. 80% of shipments that left late still arrive on time. So there's some buffer in the transit time, right? Just like the airlines, right? You've ever realized you always leave the gate late, but you always get there early? On time again, they like to say. So there's some buffer, and it has to be for the kind of things Adam's talking about. The flip to that is, we saw of the shipments that are late, 50% of them also left late, right? So there's a correlation to late departure to late on time. And then I'll leave you with this. I make a lot of trips. That's a personal trip. We do it almost every month. It's about a 10-hour drive, and from our house to my in-laws. And the bogey is literally 2 hours. Sometimes that trip is a 10-hour trip, and sometimes it's 12. Between traffic and weather, we don't know what it's going to be. So you take a truck then, not the same as driving a personal car. And the delays that can happen, and the restarts and the breaks that they have to take and so forth, as Adam puts out, it's really difficult to be super precise. And so you pad the transit times, and then you get early. And I appreciate that's not welcomed by a receiver either. It's just really tough to be precise. Sure.
Well, we got a question about, just real quick, and this is going to be our last one. We're talking about being on time, so we're going to end on time. But in the Louisville, Kentucky market, we're seeing a decline in drivers enrolling in truck driving schools, which is directly impacting current driver availability. Is this a nationwide trend? How do we see this impacting 3 to 5 year outlook for new drivers entering the market?
Jarrett can probably start on this one, I bet.
Yeah, I don't know if there's enough time on this question. That's allotted to me. I'll try and be brief in 30 seconds by just saying that if the trucking, I guess if the local jurisdiction transportation areas took like ILMA's lead and started to look at scholarships and started to look at different ways to attract people into the industry. It's like lubricant chemists. They're not exactly lined up around the corner everywhere you look. So you have to go to the educational places and start seeing if you can explore major degrees in those, in tribology, things like that. So not to get away from the answer here, but yeah, the trucking transportation industry has to find ways to change its way of thinking to attract new drivers.
Yeah, it's very evident in the demographics of the driver pool. If you look at American Transportation Research Institute, ATRI, from 2016 to 2018, and now I'm on the research committee, they'll do one in 2020, is the demographics have completely changed in that the general workforce picked up the millennials, trucking didn't. It just keeps getting older. We're not attracting younger people. It's key. And then in the COVID environment, even though driver schools are open again, they're only running at partial volume because of safe social distancing. And so we're absolutely not keeping up with demand, to your point.
All right, well, that's not a very promising note to end on. It is something that the whole industry is going to have to address, and we're going to have to get really serious about it. But I wanted to thank you, Jarrett and Steve and Adam, for a great job and for sharing all of your information and joining us today. And Chuck's back to thank everybody and say goodbye. Chuck?
Yeah, thank you guys. That was a great program. Jarrett, I'm with you on the education side and getting, I like that idea, just listening. You got to go out and find ways of doing it instead of sitting at home complaining about it, basically. So that was well said. And you guys all did a great job. And, happy holidays to everybody from.
Yes, happy holidays
Holidays.
from ILMA. And thanks again for joining us. And we'll see you in the new year. We're all ready for 2021.
There we go. We'll see you in June.
All right.
Thank you for
Yeah.
the opportunity.
Okay. Bye-bye.